The worst place to burn out is behind a heavy wooden desk, a private corner office, looking out over a late-night skyline. It looks like the ultimate symbol of corporate conquest. But inside that room, the atmosphere is suffocating. You are sitting completely alone in a tailored suit, staring at an unfinished email. Your chest feels tight. Your heart is racing and your body is screaming for a break. Every logical cell in your brain knows that if you just click CC and type 3 words, "I need help," the crisis would be managed, a team would step in, the burden would be shared, and you could finally breathe, but your finger freezes over the keyboard. It paralyzes you to your nervous system. Sending that email does not feel like professional collaboration. It feels like total emotional exposure. It feels like admitting you are structurally flawed. You would rather carry the crushing weight of a failing project until your bones fracture than let anyone see that you do not have everything under absolute control. This is the psychological paralysis of the hyper-competent overthinker. It is a very specific type of corporate suffering that self-help culture completely misdiagnoses. The world tells you to practice time management or delegation, but they do not understand that for you, delegation feels like stepping off a cliff without a parachute. This rigid need for absolute containment was not born in a business school. It is not an executive habit you picked up along the way. It is a highly advanced, ancient survival strategy that you developed long before you ever entered a boardroom. You became a hyper-perceptive student of your environment because you had no choice. You had to learn to read the room perfectly, to calculate behavioral risks in milliseconds, and to predict bad outcomes before they landed. You built a magnificent, unshakable armor of raw competence to protect a vulnerable inner reality. Now, you are a master of the corporate battlefield, but you are trapped inside the very armor that kept you alive. When this hypersensitized childhood system enters the modern corporate ecosystem, it translates into a unique behavioral pathology. These individuals become the absolute pillars of their organizations. They are the ones who handle the most chaotic projects without a single word of protest. They wear their capability like a heavy armor, but if you look closely at their psychological architecture, you will find a total absence of trust. They operate on an unwritten ironclad rule that was drafted when they were 8 years old. That rule says that dependency is a structural vulnerability for a large number of these chronic overthinkers. The habit of hypervigilance began in empty houses. They were the children who let themselves in after school, made their own meals, and managed their own crises in complete isolation. They learned very early that the adults in their world were either emotionally absent, volatile, or entirely consumed by their own restructurings. When a child realizes that actions have immediate, unbuffered consequences, the brain is forced to grow up in real time. They stop asking for help because asking for help feels like an admission of total defeat. This deep-seated self-reliance extends directly into how they process everyday workplace information. To the casual observer, their relentless planning looks like ambition or high dedication, but neurologically, it is a desperate attempt to neutralize uncertainty before it can strike. They are constantly mapping out scenarios that may never actually happen, replaying finished conversations, and drafting internal monologues at 2 a.m. Cognitive psychologists refer to this endless mental spinning as maladaptive rumination. It is the illusion of mental progress. The mind feels like it is actively solving a complex puzzle, but it is actually just trapped in a self-reinforcing loop. The truly insidious part of this mechanism lies in the brain's neurochemistry. Your brain naturally releases small amounts of dopamine during the act of problem solving, even when that problem solving is entirely imagined. When an overthinker runs through an anticipated corporate confrontation for the 10th time, analyzing every angle and constructing perfect mental arguments, the brain rewards the activity itself. It rewards the anxiety. It provides a chemical incentive to keep the system running online. Telling these individuals to simply stop thinking is not just unhelpful, it is neurologically naive. The cost of maintaining this cognitive high-resolution operating system is staggering. It creates a psychological state known as defensive pessimism, where a person crosses their fingers for a positive outcome but deeply expects the rug to be pulled out at any moment. They have watched systemic restructuring destroy the lives of those before them, and they refuse to be caught off guard. They do not believe in institutional loyalty, so they become fiercely loyal to their own raw competence. They cannot control the volatile shifts of the market or the hidden agendas of upper management, but they can control whether they are the most hyper-aware, indispensable asset in the room. Yet, this constant auditing of reality builds an undercurrent of social anxiety. Every email is analyzed. For hidden microaggressions, every casual comment from a manager is dissected for systemic risk. They develop a staggering capacity for cognitive empathy, allowing them to read the unspoken emotional texture of a boardroom with unsettling sensitivity. They notice the microscopic twitch of a jaw, the subtle defensive posture of a peer, the unvoiced power dynamics that govern the space. They gather all the data. They feel the full weight of every possibility, but they lack a mechanism to shut the system down. They have built a magnificent radar, but they have forgotten how to rest. This is the great paradox at the heart of traumatic intelligence. The very cognitive engine that makes someone exceptionally perceptive, deeply empathetic, and strategically brilliant is the exact same engine that quietly drains their life force. Their perception lacks resolution because the mind refuses to believe that it is finally safe. In the therapeutic space, clinicians who work with these high-functioning overthinkers do not try to force the thoughts to stop entirely. That is an impossible task for a nervous system that has been trained for decades to stay alert. Instead, the focus shifts toward altering the individual's fundamental relationship to their own internal monologue. Frameworks like acceptance and commitment therapy introduce a vital concept known as cognitive diffusion. It is the deliberate practice of observing a thought loop without immediately fusing your identity with it. It is the transition from believing this situation is an existential threat and I must think my way out of it, to simply recognizing my brain is generating a highly complex concern right now. One reaction pulls you into the quicksand of the spiral, while the other provides a critical fraction of psychological distance. Ultimately, understanding this pattern does not magically erase the years of neurological wiring, but it fundamentally shifts the balance of power. Overthinking is not a personality defect or a sign of psychological weakness. It is a highly active, beautifully sophisticated mind that learned to adapt to an uncertain world. The challenge for these modern corporate warriors is not to destroy their radar, but to gently teach their own nervous system that the childhood emergency is over. They must learn that some things in life are meant to be felt, decided, or completely released, rather than mathematically solved. The empty house they grew up in shaped their survival, but they no longer live. In that empty house, they are allowed to take off the sharp suit, step out of the dense boardroom, and give the prefrontal cortex permission to finally stand down. It is a long, slow process of rewriting the internal operating code. But the moment they realize they can notice the concern without becoming the concern, the wall clock stops sounding like gunfire, and the mind can finally begin to rest. The deepest tragedy of this highly functioning survival mechanism is that it inevitably spills into the private chambers of personal existence. In the boardroom, hypervigilance looks like calculated genius, but in the quiet theater of intimacy, it manifests as an invisible wall because these individuals learned early that depending on another human being invites systemic risk. They remain psychologically insulated. Even when surrounded by love, they audit their relationships with the same cold rigor. They apply to a corporate spreadsheet. They analyze a partner's subtle shift in tone. They overinterpret a delayed response to a message, and they instinctively construct worst-case scenarios to shield their hearts from potential betrayal. This relentless emotional defense system ensures they are never caught off guard, but it also guarantees they are never truly reached. They become prisoners of their own tactical success. They are capable of managing immense logistical pressure, yet they remain profoundly illiterate. In the language of uncalculated vulnerability, their mind treats joy not as an experience to be felt, but as an unstable variable that must be continuously monitored and secured. This brings us to the ultimate, painful realization that every hyper-focused overthinker must eventually confront. You cannot think your way into a state of peace. The very tool you are using to search for safety, your relentless, hyperactive prefrontal cortex, is the source of the persistent fire. True liberation from this internal monologue does not require you to lobotomize your intelligence or pretend your early adversity did not happen. It requires you to transition from being a victim of your radar to becoming its master. Your advanced pattern recognition and your clinical sharpness are magnificent cognitive assets, forged in the fires of a childhood where you had no choice but to survive. They belong to you, but they are not you when the mental loop begins. At 2 a.m, when the phantom corporate crisis starts to spin, you must look at the thought with the cold detachment of a seasoned operator. You do not argue with the radar. You do not try to suppress the alarm. You simply look at the screen, acknowledge the signal, and remind your central nervous system that the baseline environment has fundamentally changed. The empty house of your childhood is gone, and you are no longer the vulnerable child. Holding a brass key in an unpredictable world, you are an adult with immense competence. Standing in a reality you possess the power to shape, the corporate suits you wear, and the dense boardrooms you navigate are just temporary arenas, not permanent battlegrounds. For your survival, you have survived every unpredictable shift that the world has thrown at you, not because you controlled every variable, but because your spirit was fundamentally resilient. It is finally time to give the warrior inside your chest permission to rest. Let the water be just water, let the silence be just silence, and allow that magnificent, exhausted mind to finally lay down its weapons and breathe.